obviously you have found your reason, or at least I hope you found your reason to be a fan of professional wrestling and a follower of the latest brand extension and the first brand extension, mind you, in 14, 15 years. Years ago, of course, like I said, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, The Undertaker, they were all exclusive to be drafted as they were this year, but they were wrestling full time. And when you have people like The Undertaker and John Cena now wrestling full time, not always there, are you really going to take a chance on drafting somebody who, you only see wrestle once or twice a year, as opposed to drafting someone like the Big Show and Chris Jericho, who at least are still wrestling full time? Maybe not so much in the way of Chris Jericho and the Big Show, but at least you have, them there more so. And I think that's something you have to take a chance on more so than drafting someone like The Undertaker or Brock Lesnar. And to be honest with you, I was kind of really hoping that we were going to see The Undertaker drafted exclusively to either Raw or SmackDown. I was really let down on that because I've always been a big fan of The Undertaker, but I do realize The Undertaker's down to wrestling once or twice a year, and you can't always rely on him. I think that the choices this year were made ultimately better on Raw than they were on SmackDown. It seemed like with SmackDown getting 2 draft picks in addition to Raw getting 3, of course, to accommodate for that third hour on Raw, and SmackDown only having a 2-hour live show. I think they're still trying to take it slow with SmackDown. It's kind of just a trial and error basis. I think eventually what will happen, if anything needs to happen, let me say this: Raw needs to seriously think about cutting back to 2 hours, because I think that having Raw have that advantage with a third draft pick to accommodate for that third hour was complete bullshit. I think that the only rule that really stood out on the rule list this year for the brand extension was the fact that if a general manager or commissioner wanted just one member of a team, that made the draft lottery that much more unpredictable. And every other rule on the rule list for this year's brand extension pretty much had its purpose defeated. It was pretty stupid seeing Raw have an additional pick as opposed to SmackDown being cut back from 3 to 2, when SmackDown should have had 3 picks and Raw should have had 3 picks. I think there were somewhere between 15 and 20 picks made on the first live SmackDown, and I think it was a great way of kicking off the SmackDown Live era. Although it's kind of up in the air where we will go from here, I think that it is a very unpredictable time for wrestling fans. And if there ever was a time to be a fan of professional wrestling, that time is now, and we should take full advantage of it. And that does not go without saying that we will not see a draft lottery at some point between now and probably the fall of WrestleMania 33, because we're bound to see a draft lottery at some point where the computer will choose the draft picks for Raw, SmackDown, and possibly even NXT being thrown in there as well. Also really appreciated how the commentators were talking about the possibility of them being drafted between shows, but I don't think that we will see that until at least the draft lottery's gotten in there between now and WrestleMania 33. There are a lot of ways this can go. All in all, the 5-star scale perspective, 3 out of 5 stars, taking 2 off for how SmackDown, of course, really had the, not really the majority of the picks went to SmackDown. The majority of the all-star picks went to Raw, an all-star lineup pretty much on the 3-hour show. And that was to be expected because, of course, they're the flagship show. They're the one that's carrying the shows every week, the brands. And obviously, Raw was expected to dominate, and obviously that prediction was followed through with. Was not really a big fan of how SmackDown really came out with not the majority of the picks, because, John Cena and Randy Orton, you look at how SmackDown fared in the way of picks from Raw, and John Cena and Randy Orton is supposed to make up for this phenomenal roster, which included Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins, 2/3 of the Shield, Brock Lesnar, The Big Show, Rusev, Sasha Banks, Charlotte. All these rivalries being drafted to Raw. Not to say that SmackDown didn't get all these rivalries as well, but the majority of the feuds and the majority of the belts were drafted to Raw. The star power really was with Raw. That's what it came out of with the draft lottery this year, and SmackDown pretty much was left in the dirt to make up for lost time. Not to say that they won't, but 3 out of 5 stars is what I'm going with this year's draft lottery. All the information on the 2016 draft lottery brand extension can be found on WWE.com. And no, I am not wearing blue because I'm partial and favoring SmackDown in the fall of this year's brand extension as opposed to the draft lottery from 14 years ago when we saw, Raw dominating. And of course, I was favoring Raw. I'm not really favoring SmackDown 14 years later. I wasn't favoring Raw back then as much as what I probably was favoring something like SmackDown this year. SmackDown kind of let me down this year in the brand extension, but that's not to say they will not make up for lost time. Really big fan of how Seth Rollins, of course, was drafted to Raw, and how ESPN and Forbes kind of came through. Still a big fan of Dean Ambrose, and I think that WWE still has a very promising future despite all the fallouts and the setbacks that we are looking at from this year's draft lottery. Just to give you a heads up on the draft lottery, the Brand extension, call it whatever you want. I will be writing a column on my website as promised with all my thoughts on the fallout from the 2016 WWE draft, so make sure you keep your eye out for that. And I will be posting this video on my YouTube channel. So for those of you who have not subscribed, make sure you subscribe and don't miss out on the ongoing conversation on social media networks like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on Google+. Facebook.com/HEW Entertainment. You can send me a message my way. You can also post something creative on my wall. I would also like to see your dream rosters that you made from WWE.com/draft. I'm a really big fan of fantasy. Of course, I've been running fantasy storylines for years, as you've known for years. So I really would like to see your fantasy rosters. If you were the GMs and commissioners of Raw and SmackDown and NXT, I'd love to see those. So submit those you can on my Facebook page and Google Plus at HEW Entertainment. You can tweet me. Send a tweet my way at Jonathan Clarke1 with your thoughts on the fallout from the 2016 draft. And of course, on YouTube, you can comment on this video blog, which I'll be throwing up this live show, this live stream at youtube.com/JonathanClarke22. Subscribe if you haven't already and get in on the conversation of the 2016 draft, the first draft that we've seen in 14 through 15 years. Times are changing, in the words of Vince McMahon. And times can be changing at a better time and not for the better than what we've ever seen before. I think it's a very unpredictable time. If there ever was a time to be a wrestling fan and to get in on the conversation, that time is now. If you have a thought on the 2016 draft, get in on the conversation. It may be looked at as a way of mimicking sports organizations like the MLB, the NBA, and the NHL. But hey, they're just trying to coincide with everything else happening in the sports world, and they're obviously doing a great job with it, because if they weren't, nobody would be talking about it. I'm your host, Jonathan Clarke, and I will talk to you again next week.
HEW Entertainment Radio is a production of HEW Entertainment on their official website and broadcasts on social media. You can join the conversation on our Facebook page at HEW Entertainment, follow and listen to our show on Twitter at Jonathan Clarke1, and watch us on our YouTube channel at Jonathan Clarke22. Hosted and produced by Jonathan Clarke out of Canada. If you have any questions on our radio broadcast, you can email us at jonathanclarke2005@hotmail.com. Thank you for listening.